My name is Bob Matthew. I'm the director of the Wisconsin Center for Education Research. Yeah! I presume that's for the center, not for the director. But it's just wonderful to see everyone here. I've had time to go look at so many of the posters, and as much as I appreciate all of the senior faculty and research staff out there, what about those grad students? Are they just like fantastic? So this is an event sponsored by the School of Education through the network and by WCER. And it's an event that celebrates education research across the entire campus, because there's just so much going on in the campus also beyond the School of Education. We had some posters out there from SMPH and some posters out there from engineering. And you know, the opportunities and the challenges today for our young people are so intertwined with education and health and issues of economics and social issues. We've just got to be working together. And that's what this, in a sense, this poster fair is all about. And it's just really, it's really wonderful to see so much of the diversity out there among the posters. At the same time, we're very fortunate today, as a very long-standing initiative, the Wisconsin Center for Education Research has sponsored the Carl A. Grant Lecture Series. And the goal of this lecture series is to enhance the awareness of scholars of color and their work in education and beyond our campus, and to promote scholarly interest in collaborations in multicultural educational topics. Now, actually, I said it's been a long-standing initiative. In fact, it's a long-standing series of speakers. It's been the Carl A. Grant Scholars since September last fall. And we haven't really had the opportunity to just fully honor Carl and embarrass him, if at all possible, with all that he has done since he's arrived here. So this event, and with James being here from Washington and yet being an alum as well, it's the right time to finally really explain, if you will, why we've changed the name to the Carl A. Grant Scholars. So to speak to the many reasons for honoring Carl, it's my honor and pleasure to introduce the Dean of the School of Education, Diana Hess.
Hi, everyone. Let me do that again. Hi, everyone. And I want to congratulate all the folks who have been helping us learn about their work this morning. It really is quite exciting to see the wide variety. My job for the next couple of minutes is to tell you about one of my colleagues, Carl Grant. As Bob just mentioned, our speaker, Dr. Miner, is here through the Carl Grant Scholars Fund. And Carl's had such a huge impact on this campus, but I know some of you are new to the campus and you probably don't know about his history. So let me just take a few minutes and tell you why Carl Grant has a Scholars Fund named after him. Carl is a full professor in the Department of Curriculum and Instruction, and he's widely known, not just in Wisconsin or in the United States or in the world, he's widely known as being the father of multicultural education. Carl created the field with the help of a lot of people, but he really created the field. And he didn't just create it and then let it go. He created the field and helped it develop over a number of decades. When I started in education, we thought of multicultural education as just trying to get more diverse voices. We wanted, for example, textbooks to be more diverse. But Carl turned that important goal to something even bigger and broader, which is how can we make sure that schools focus principally on equity and access, so it's not just that we have more diverse voices, but so all kids get equal access to a high-quality education. And he's been at this for more than 40 years. He's been recognized in so many ways. There's a scholarship award named after him by the National Association of Multicultural Education, which, by the way, he was the first president of that, and he was the first editor of that now very famous journal. When I came here in 1999, I remember my first interview with Carl, and I was just so intrigued to see that here was this person who's been here for a long time, who has created all of these great programs, all over the world, but who is so grounded in the lives of teachers and in the importance of teacher education that he quizzed me with some pretty pointed questions, as I recall, about just what I could bring to this place that would help teachers. And that's what caused me to learn that first and foremost, Carl cares about teachers, he cares about teacher education, and he has had such a dramatic impact. He's a lifelong learner, and we always say that, it's kind of a trite phrase, but here's what it really means to be a lifelong learner. It means that you're doing research and scholarship that always is pushing you into new areas. It means that you want to bring to campus through this program people who are going to help us learn things that we wouldn't learn otherwise. And it means that you want to engage in a critical way with your colleagues about the issues of the day. So 2 weeks ago, Carl called me. He said, I just have a few minutes, but I just got back from an important conference. I learned some things. I need to tell you about them. And he spent about 5 minutes telling me about exactly what was going on in the national world of teacher education that we needed to care about. And I was so impressed by that. I thought, here's somebody who founded a field, founded an organization, founded a journal, has been the advisor to how many graduate students, has taught how many teacher education students, and yet he's still in every way in the game. So I want you to stand, all of you, and I want Carl to come up here. And I want you to join me in thanking Carl Grant for all he's done for us.
Can you hand me that book right there? I want to say one thing. I'm going to be off of here in 1 second. Yeah, just let me have it. I'm currently working on a book on W.B. Du Bois. And in the book, in fact, before I got ready to come over there today, I was back in the 1960s. And it was good to go back to the 1960s as I prepare to look at what was going on this campus and throughout the world. So there are a couple of things I want to say. I pulled up Abraham, Martin, and John. About Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King, and John F. Kennedy. The other piece I pulled up and listened to was He Ain't Heavy, He's My Brother. These pieces were the songs of the 1960s. And in many ways, they captured what was going on. Particularly on this campus in this month, only a few decades ago, we had the bombing of Sterling Hall, the Vietnam protests, and we also had Black students marching and arguing for Black studies that had basically took off at San Francisco State and the demand. There was the call out of the National Guard. And the members of the Black Studies came and gave to the chancellor demands. One of those demands, I could argue, is the reason that I'm here, the reason that we're speaking, the reason that this lecture is here. So when I think about this lecture with my name, it really goes back to the people in the 1960s. I also thank Jelando Jackson, who pushed Julie Underwood, who said this is a worthy cause. So my name is just there, and then you add the comma and you keep going. I really want to thank you for being here. It's not about me. It is about the journey. My granddaughter is here. I told her she needed to be here because this is about her generation. Her name is Amaya. This is who this battle is about. I thank you.
So we are very honored to have Dr. Miner with us today. And to introduce Dr. Miner, I think there's nothing more fitting than asking his advisor to have that honor. So Dr. Cliff Conrad, as you know, is a full professor in our Education Leadership and Policy Studies Department. He's a Vilas Distinguished Achievement Professor. He's done decades worth of high quality work, and one of the things that I can promise you, I know this from dinner last night, that he did really well is to make sure that Dr. Miner had an unbelievable first-rate education here. Cliff, come on up.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here with you. Before introducing our visiting scholar, I, accenting what Dean Hess said in many ways, would like to take the liberty of emphasizing the extraordinary contributions of this gentleman at the front table, and I mean this most sincerely. On behalf of myself and so many, here and far beyond, I would simply like to express our collective appreciation, admiration, and respect for the work that you, Carl Grant, have done over the last 41 years. A little bit more. Now, may I speak freely? 2 years before the turn of the 20th century, 1998, as I recall, a young man wandered onto our campus and entered the Department of Educational Leadership and Policy Analysis and started schooling in the higher education track, pursuing his PhD. Among the most formidable challenges that James faced was his advisor. Notwithstanding this and other obstacles that he faced here, James not only survived at UW-Madison, but he thrived. He did so with remarkable resilience, with fierce intelligence, and with a remarkable sense, I should add, or exceptional sense of humor, which as he continues to do to this day. I could go on and on about his collective achievements. We all know those are often accented awards, publications, honors, and on and on. I'd like to focus not so much on James' individual achievements as I would on who he is as a scholar, as an activist, as a truth seeker, and a senior official in the U.S. Department of Education. James has had one hell of a life story, and I may tell it someday. Having grown up in Detroit and having dodged some challenges that accompanied his neighborhood, James headed south to Mississippi, and he went to Jackson State University, an HBCU, one of our nation's most prominent public HBCUs, I should add. And I think it was at Jackson State where James, for the first time, embraced a lifelong commitment, advancing equal educational opportunity for all traditionally underserved and underrepresented students, including African American, Hispanic, Native American, et cetera, et cetera. Early on, James developed a deep appreciation, and I know this, I've known him now for almost 2 decades, that the reason so many traditionally underserved students or underrepresented students were not succeeding in higher education was not a lack of capability, but a lack of opportunity and a lack of understanding of the many challenges that they faced outside, including but far outside and far beyond college affordability. Fueled by his commitment to equal educational opportunity for all, James placed this at the center of his scholarship at UW, then a couple of years at USC, and then on his pathway to securing tenure at that university in East Lansing, Michigan, otherwise known as Michigan State University. Along with his scholarship, I think it was when James moved to Atlanta and worked at oversaw the Southern Education Foundation's higher education programs, that he was able to wholeheartedly, and emphasize that, pursue his passion for equal educational opportunity. With grit and determination, he oversaw the foundation's program aimed at celebrating, and I'm very familiar with this, and many of you are as well, the aim of enhancing the capacity of minority-serving colleges and universities, and to improve post-secondary access and opportunity for low-income and minority students. And in so doing, he not only developed policies and programs and practices to advance equal, but through his personal voice, and I think it's a good lesson for me and many of us at the same time, his personal voice in blogs and other media, through beautifully crafted prose, I might add, and should add, he challenged and continues to challenge faculty, administrative staff, and students in higher education, not just to talk about equal opportunity for all, but to take actions and do it on a daily basis to ensure that all students are able to realize their educational aspirations. For the last 5 years, as a Deputy Assistant Secretary for Higher Education in the Office of Post-Secondary Education in the Department of Education, James has built on and extended his work as a scholar and as a practitioner, applying his knowledge and understanding and rich experiences in overseeing federal funding aimed in large measure at advancing equal educational opportunity for minority students, but also first-generation students and low-income students. Meanwhile, he has continued to express his voice in the public domain, and I really do want to emphasize that, by challenging such policies as policy incongruence, instances in which state higher education officials elevate the importance of student success and access on the one hand, while increasing tuition. That clearly undermines student access and success. Scholar, public intellectual, he really is, public servant of the highest order, excuse me, and a damn fine human being. James Minor embodies the very spirit of the Wisconsin idea, a spirit that we sometimes need to remind ourselves about. Pursuing ideas which are already James is doing and will continue to make a difference in incorporating inclusivity into the fabric of our nation's colleges and universities, including ideas for unsettling and transforming the ivory tower in ways that will uplift not only minority students and first-generation students and low-income students, but also undocumented students as well. The bloody truth is, James inspires me and many others, many, many others, because of who he is, the work that he does. His decision to embrace equal educational opportunity for all over self-celebration, and how to live a life with courage, with authenticity, and integrity. I'm proud today to introduce to you Dr. James Minor.
Good afternoon. I'm really happy to be here, and I'm really proud to be here, and I'll tell you why as quickly as I can. I do want to say thanks to Dean Hess and Bob for inviting me back, and Dr. Laura Dunnick has been an amazing, gracious host. You never think you could have a host coming back home, but she's just been wonderful and incredibly patient with me and my team in trying to organize this occasion, so thank you very much. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Carl, and if you all see the way he's leaned back in the chair, Dean Hess, I have heard him referred to as the godfather of multicultural education, and I think he embodies that. But I'm truly honored, Carl. You're such a pioneer, and for those of us who are still trying to make our contribution and make our way, the fact that we've got giants like you ahead of us and who have paved the way for those of us who are still trying to make the world a better place, I just want to say I appreciate your work, and I'm honored to be a part of this lecture series that is named after you. I also want to say, just take a moment, I learned of the loss of Dr. Paul Bredesen recently, who was a faculty member here, obviously, when I was here, and I just want to acknowledge his contribution to my career and to my time here at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So I see a lot of friendly faces. Cliff introduced me. It always makes me nervous. And you all know why. He said to me yesterday, James, people are really looking forward to your being here, and I don't really know why, he said. I went, well, you know. But Cliff has been a phenomenal mentor and friend. Our relationship obviously began as a graduate student and a faculty advisor, but I'm really proud to say he's one of the smartest people I know, and he's one of the best friends that I have. And so when he's given me the business yesterday, most of you know he walks around with these accordion brown folders. They're taped up and there are papers hanging out of them. He reached in and he grabbed one. And the one that he grabbed looked, you all have seen the first 4 slides of my presentation, perhaps thanks to Cliff. Let's see here. This is what he pulls out. So the only thing you need to pay attention to is the red arrow that points to, this was the very first paper I submitted as a graduate student here. You all have seen enough, thank you very much. On to the presentation. But we pulled this out, and you could imagine there are a couple of people in the room who have experienced James Minor as the faculty member and would argue that the feedback that I give looks similar to Jamila's raising her hand. But let me just tell you what that translated into was an incredible level of care and commitment to teaching. And I think any development or professional accomplishments, I have to acknowledge that. So Cliff, I appreciate your chicken scratch on my papers, but your interest in developing me as a scholar and now as a human being. So I appreciate that. Let me just tell you what I'm going to try to accomplish in the next 30 minutes or so. The poster presentations were amazing. I said to a couple of people, I'm reminded of how special this place is and how many incredibly smart people are in this university community. The graduate students are far smarter than I was when I was here, and I mean this sincerely. Just in the presentations I had a chance to see here are amazing. but let me tell you how I'm going to try and engage you in the discussion today. So I have the perhaps unique intersection of being a faculty member, trained as a researcher, and now sort of a public policy wonk in Washington, D.C. It could be argued that I work and live now at the epicenter of public policy and education. And not all of my colleagues have the research background or faculty experience that I might bring to the role. And so I like to think that I still have one foot, one arm in the research community and the other half in a very active and busy public policy space. And what I'm going to share with you is pretty simple. I'm going to make the case for innovation and research, but I want to talk to you in the context of what I understand as national higher education problems and the role of innovation and the research we all love and care about play in addressing those issues. And I'm going to try not to bore Amaya in the process. So let me just explain to you very quickly what the heck a Deputy Assistant Secretary is or does. Primarily, the role that I play is one part programmatic, one part political, one part policy or regulatory work that we advance. My office delivers probably about $3 billion annually in higher education programming in the space. And it's primarily devoted to three sort of big topics. One is to broaden access to post-secondary education, to strengthen the capacity of institutions to serve more students better. And the third is to invest in innovation in the space, in the higher education space. Right now, we've got about $7.8 billion of programming on the ground, and I want you to think about the ability to leverage that kind of funding to expand college access, to improve institutional capacity, and to spur innovation in the field. A little bit of that money, not a lot, about $2 million is spent here at UW-Madison. Many of you may know these programs. Campus, which we refer to as Child Care Access Means Parents and Schools, a program that supports and assists parents who need child care to pursue their degree. The Ronald E. McNair program, Student Support Services, are the three programs that are funded out of my office on the campus. If you hadn't heard of them, I encourage you to contact the project directors about the work that they're doing. Here's the challenge. Can you all hear me okay if I step away? I'd like to walk around, but I don't know that the podium will allow me. As recent as 1990, some of you all in the room remember 1990. Belle Biv DeVoe, Poison. LeVar, you remember. Okay, one person is with me. Poison. As recent as 1990, the US was #1 in the world in terms of proportion of citizens that had a college degree. As recent as 1990. Today, depending on which report you read, we're somewhere in the neighborhood of 12th or as low as 14th. And the President, Secretary of Education, this administration has been very intentional about once again being first in the world. And the goal of being first in the world is not a matter of competition. Depending on which report you read, as recent as 2020, there will be approximately 3 million jobs in the US that we cannot fill because we don't have enough educated citizens. So it's not just about the idea of being first in the world. This is just a quick visual representation about where we need to go. If you look at adults in the country today between the ages of 25 and 64, individuals we expect to be in the workplace, only about 39%, close to 40% today have a post-secondary degree. And in order to once again be first in the world, we've got to get from 40%, 39, 40% to 60%. That means producing an additional 20 million degree holders over and beyond what we're projected to produce today. Different visual representation, if you look at the top line on the chart and you look at the bottom blue line, is the current projection. And I can tell you, looking at this, if I look at 2014 and 2016, we're already behind the projected blue line. So forget about the top line, which is the projection or the trajectory that we need to achieve in order to, again, be first in the world. So here is the big problem. Now, keep in mind the research, educational research, relative to some of the big problems that I'm going to try and describe to you as we go forward. So most people say, well, what's the big deal with college completion, James? We know that college access is a challenge. We know that college affordability is a challenge. Right now in this country, the two fastest growing groups of young people are the least likely to graduate from high school, they're among the least likely to enroll in college, and they're among the least likely to graduate from college once there. Now, think about the projection line, the two fastest growing groups of young people, least likely to graduate from high school, least likely to enroll in college, least likely to graduate from college once there. And affordability is a big problem. You all know this better than I do, that the majority of school-age children now, in public schools anyway, are students of color, and nearly half of them are poor. In every state, we can count students in the public K-12 system, and so we know what the horizon looks like demographically in terms of the students who are going to enroll in college. The overwhelming majority of first-generation students who show up to college today show up underprepared academically and without enough money to persist past the first year of college. Affordability is a big issue. What you see here is just a very simple, the most basic breakdown of what it costs, published rates for tuition and fees for each sector of higher education. The red there is where UW-Madison falls in both of those categories, slightly higher than the national average in terms of what it costs for in-state students and out-of-state students. But there's a quick overlay here. This won't surprise most of you in terms of the most expensive sectors of higher education. Some people are a little surprised that the for-profit sector seems affordable relative to some of the others. But here's what really matters. In that far column are graduation rates for each one of the sectors. And it doesn't take very long for you to see a clear inverse. That is that the most affordable sector of higher education is also the sector where students are least likely to graduate. Now, the other thing I need you to do as you look at UW-Madison's completion rate is that just for a moment, even in this fine building, with all the smart people in the room, is to disassociate yourself momentarily from the UW-Madison experience. Why do I say that? If you look at the graduation rate and you look at the experience of UW-Madison students, it does not necessarily reflect the overwhelming majority of students that are participating in post-secondary institutions. So the UW-Madison reality for this talk cannot be your reference point for understanding national higher education problems. It is a data point, but it is not an appropriate reference point for understanding national higher education issues. If you look at the sectors that have the highest completion rates, it's the private four-year sector, which also happens to be the most expensive. Part of the challenge, if you look at the community college system, I mentioned earlier today, more than half of Hispanic students today are enrolled in community colleges. The state of California has perhaps the largest and most expansive community college system, if not the most affordable, and the one with the strongest articulation agreements between 2- and 4-year institutions. Nearly 2.3 million students are enrolled in California's community college system. It's affordable, great articulation agreements, but if you look at the number of students who transfer or earn an associate's degree, not very good. And again, the calculations are based on 150% time. That's a government calculation, which means 3 years to earn a 2-year degree. And if I told you that 70% of students do not complete a credential or transfer after 6 years in the community college system in California, 75% of African Americans and 80% of Latinos do not complete or transfer. Now, what's the multiplying effect of that nationally? Now you all have MATC. And if you looked comparatively, what would be the over-under on how MATC is performing? Who's taking over? Who says MATC is performing better than the California community college system? Bob? Okay, a few others. Who's under? All right, we got a lot of people. It's interesting how everybody becomes a qualitative researcher when you ask these questions. Here's what MATC looks like. Approximately 40,000 students, many of them obviously are not pursuing the associate's degree, but for 63% of first-time, full-time, do not complete or transfer after 3 years, 89% for African Americans, and 87% for Hispanic students. Again, think about the multiplying effect of this nationally, and you start to see the picture of the sort of very large higher education issues. Now, most of you take issue with the for-profit sector. We had a conversation about this earlier today, and I told the story about the 2 interns who ran into my office, one from Morehouse, one from Spelman College, who said, look at how poorly the for-profit sector is performing for low-income first-generation students. And I said to him that if I were a father, a 35-year-old father of 2 children with a mortgage, could I be a Morehouse man? Could I pack up, move back into the dormitory, and go to school from 8 to 3, Monday through Thursday? The answer clearly no. When you look at who is the #1 producer of African-American baccalaureates, far and away, it is the University of Phoenix. Now, let me put this into perspective. The University of Phoenix, the main campus, enrolls about 195,000 students. The graduation rate for African American students at the University of Phoenix is 12%. And even with a graduation rate of 12%, the degree productivity at the University of Phoenix compared to every other traditional institution, if you look closely at the list, the top 2 producers are for-profit institutions. I also draw people's attention to the gender disparity there. And so, you know, folks have mixed feelings about the for-profit sector. Florida A&M, the institutions that are in the darker blue represent historically Black colleges and universities, which also is an interesting narrative for this population of students. But the only reason I show you this is not to entertain an argument about the for-profit sector. It's really about degree productivity and where students are finding opportunities. Just a couple of notes about the administration's priorities in higher education. They're very clear, focused on helping families afford college, and there's a lot here. I'm only gonna highlight one bullet point here, and that is pay as you earn, or maybe 2, public service loan forgiveness. How many people in the room know about public service loan forgiveness, just by show of hands? Excellent, excellent. Really quickly, the pay as you earn sort of regulatory change is really to ensure that every individual who takes out a federal student loan has a reasonable repayment option. For those of us who got student loans maybe 20 years ago, or even before then, when you graduated from college, about 6 months later, that you got a piece of mail that says, congratulations, you've graduated, now it's time to start repaying your student loan. It didn't matter if you had a job, it didn't matter if you had a high-paying job, it didn't matter if you were established in your career. This has led to a lot of repayment issues and default issues for a lot of student loan borrowers. The idea behind pay as you earn is for every student loan borrower who takes out a federal student loan is to have a reasonable repayment option and to cap that repayment option till about 10% of your discretionary income. right? Major policy issue that we think will help a lot of students manage their debt. The other is public service loan forgiveness, which for individuals, if you go on the federal student aid website, there is a list of public service professions, teachers, firefighters, who, if you service your federal student loan for 10 years, 120 payments responsibly, after which point the balance of your federal student loan would be forgiven. Keeping costs down, I'll talk about America's College Promise just momentarily, is another big part of the administration's agenda. Obviously, after what I just showed you, strengthening community colleges and improving transparency and accountability. And I don't mean accountability here in terms of government accountability or auditing. It really has to do with transparency and whether or not we can provide better information to students and families about how to transition from high school to college. We all know the sort of guidance counselor crisis in the country. The guidance counselor ratio to student ratio in some places is as high as 1,000 to 1. As recent as my time at Michigan State, we had a budget situation where the guidance counselor spent 2 days in one school, 3 days in another school. And if you talk to them, the overwhelming majority report that the majority of their time spent engaging students is not about college advising. It's really about high school graduation requirements and resolving lots of social issues. So where do students and families get good information about college going, both technically and culturally, that helps them make that transition? College scorecard is one of the ways I think we can do that, is providing, most of folks in the room in the higher education space know NCES and iPads, and it's not a very consumer-friendly tool for students or families who are trying to get basic information about colleges and universities. So the college scorecard is not necessarily meant as a judgmental tool to be commentary about the merits of a particular college or university, as much as it is to provide just the most basic information about, what are the admission requirements? Will I get a good job if I go here? How much student debt will I expect to have if I go to this institution versus another? A year ago, the Department of Education went to Congress to ask for a waiver. Title IV in the Higher Education Act is what governs federal student aid. To get a waiver to use federal student aid alternatively. Right now, don't go read Title IV, but there's a provision there about direct instruction. So in order for a student to apply federal student aid, the regulation is now that you have to receive direct instruction. We don't have a provision to provide credit for competency-based education. And what that means, I'm now mentoring a student who is 50, who is a first-year student, long career, military background, and he was in a first-year public speaking course taught by a graduate student at the University of West Virginia. And he called me and said he had a lot of commentary about the instructor's ability to speak publicly. Right? Bottom line is, I already know this stuff. I don't need this, right? Can I get to the next class? This group of institutions with the Department of Education are participating in what we're referring to as experimental sites. Never mind the language, the government experiments, not a really good connotation, but the idea is that a group of institutions have the regulatory waiver to allow students to use their federal student aid to take competency, which means if on week 1 of a course you can demonstrate the competency, you earn the credit without having to sit 14, 16 weeks in a course, okay? And these institutions have a little infrastructure to participate there. The other experimental site is what we refer to as prior learning assessment. And a lot of campuses are doing this for individuals who are adult learners. And let me just put both of these projects in context. Right now in this country, there are about 36 million individuals with some college but no degree. Think about this. Some college, but no degree. 36 million. There are only 33 million, 3 million fewer individuals with a bachelor's degree. So think about, if looking at the trajectory, we're not going to make it up with traditional age students who are 17 or 18 years old who show up on college campuses. If we're going to make the gains that we need to make nationally, we have to figure out how to create pathways for individuals who started college and for some other reason did not complete. Prior learning assessment says that you could use your federal student aid to not only prepare, but also to pay for the assessment that colleges administer in order to award credit for prior learning, right? Two tools that we think it could really speed students up and accelerate college completion. Second Chance Pell is the other for campuses that are located in proximity to correctional facilities, whether or not we can provide educational opportunities for individuals to give them a second chance. Every year, 700,000 individuals are released from prison. We've got pretty good data, pretty good studies that say for every dollar spent on correctional education, there's a $5 return over 3 years, and recidivism goes way down. There's a new proposal introduced to accelerate Pell completion and on-track bonus, and a proposal that would help an estimated 2.3 million students as they work to finish their degree faster. What this proposal says is right now the sort of parameters of Pell are capped. This allows students to take up as many as 15 credits a semester, which increases the likelihood that they complete a 2-year degree in 2 years or a 4-year degree in 4 years. And so we've asked Congress for an additional $2 billion to add this supplement into Pell. Most of you all know your own Senator Tammy Baldwin from Wisconsin and Bobby Scott out of Virginia introduced a bill last year, America's College Promise, asked Congress for $60 billion. And most of you heard the 2 State of the Union addresses ago, the president make the proclamation that we want the first 2 years of college to be as free and as universal as high school is today. So the idea is to take affordability completely off the table for students and make the first 2 years of college absolutely free. This debuted as free community college, but the actual bill, if you look at it, I encourage you to, it's a really short bill, and there's a summary. Also includes 60 credits the first 2 years or the last 2 years at minority serving institutions like HSIs and HBCUs, which we think, if passed, could be a complete game changer on the affordability front. Reach Higher simply says we know, we're very clear about the fact that we will not legislate our way out of all of these problems, and we certainly won't be able to pay for them. If you have not heard of the First Lady's Reach Higher campaign, and there's now a Better Make Room campaign, it's the social and cultural push to encourage students to pursue their education beyond high school. And this has just been phenomenal. I think this year, April 26th, they will celebrate the 3rd annual College Signing Day. And the idea is that you all seen this on ESPN, that the star quarterback, the star basketball player has a signing day. There's a podium, there's media, there's family, and where the student has caps representing various colleges and universities, and the young person announces or proclaims that I'm going to, right, the University of Wisconsin or Indiana or wherever it is. The idea is simple, is that we want to celebrate every single student who's making the choice to go to college, and that's what College Signing Day is about, led by the First Lady's office. Big question at the Department of Education is what needs to happen in order to accomplish these kind of gains. And just a little secret from the Department of Education, big question is, will institutions change? And what's required to get institutions of higher education to behave differently? One president says it this way, one university president: I have no problem getting people to agree with the ambitious goal of graduating a higher percentage of students. The problem is deciding what we will give up or what we will change in order to accomplish the goal. The federal government doesn't exercise control necessarily over colleges and universities that have been in business for 150 years, some cases. What's required on the institution front to graduate a greater percentage of students? Now, part of the talk, and I'm almost done here, but I want to just raise a couple of points with my friends in the research community. Part of it is about innovation and whether or not it actually happens in post-secondary education or it happens outside of colleges and universities. Part of it is based on a simple premise. And this I have vetted, and I'm extremely clear about this. A lot of conviction on this one. And it's simple. It is numerically impossible for America to once again be first in the world by simply teaching and learning the same way we have for the last 50 years and without dramatically improving outcomes for low-income and first-generation students. Forget about it. So the question is, not just at UW-Madison, but in the higher education sector, what needs to happen institutionally to accomplish the gains we need for the country? And dare I say, for those of us who understood college access and degree attainment 15 or 20 years ago as a social justice issue or an equity issue, which I think it still is, the most salient argument now is an economic one. Governors of states can count the number of students in their public school system, and they can tell you to the dollar how much it costs if they have a college degree, how much it will cost the state if they don't. But by simply offering degree programs and degree opportunities the way we have, and without a laser-like focus on first generation and low-income students, we don't get there. So the question is, then, what role does the research we all know and love play in addressing some of the most pressing higher education problems in the country? Well, one, I guess, is to define, well, what the heck does James mean by innovation in higher education, and what we know it if we saw it? Couple of easy, simple definitions, right? Very mundane. The one I like most is the idea of upheaval. But I want to focus on the third definition there is a derivative of rigorous testing and experimentation, meaning that the innovation is not necessarily theoretical, right? Apple doesn't put a new battery in the phone based on theory. There's some rigorous testing and evaluation to make sure it's reliable, it works. What does that look like in the educational research space? Let me ask it this way. I could make another claim that I'm hard-pressed to find an industry that has been in business as long as higher education that knows so little about the products and services we provide for students. And we all go to research conferences all the time, right? But if I ask, and I feel as though I've got access to the national research community, what is the one or two things that we're so absolutely sure about that we should be driving the rest of the country to it in a very contextualized way? And I meet doctoral students all the time who want to tell me about their dissertation. And I can't help but to listen to their dissertation topics and their research while juxtaposing the problems that I'm trying to solve in Washington, D.C. And this is my call to the research community. A derivative of rigorous testing and experimentation. So let me just close with a few observations. That's essentially what they are. The first is, asking the question, how strong or credible is institutional research? And again, detach yourself from the UW experience. I show up on campuses where they can't tell me the grade distribution for a particular population of students across a college algebra, 5 sections of college algebra. And I don't know, given the struggles we have with degree completion and retention, that the state of institutional research, how much are we able to say about the products and services and the programs we invest millions of dollars in to provide for students? What's the quality of actionable intelligence? And even when I'm consuming research, can I act on it? And what factors impede our ability to more effectively leverage social science to advance college completion? What gets in the way? So here's a big question for research. I think we have to have a conversation about what is meant by relevance. And I'm going to make a simple sort of suggestion that research that focuses on the needs of users rather than the idiosyncratic intellectual interests of the scholar. I know, groundbreaking, right? Just saying, Julie, right? Just saying. Now, I don't even want to come close to the line of offending the idea of intellectual freedom. That's not what I'm suggesting. But I think if it's only important to you as a scholar, I have to ask the question, how relevant is it, and whether or not we should rethink what we mean by the relevance of educational research. Okay. The other is to consider the proximity to the problem. The same inverse we saw about the most expensive sector of higher education being the sector where students do the best. If I look across the landscape of higher education and I think about which sectors of higher education, which institutions have the most capital to conduct educational research that addresses national problems, there's some distance between those places and the actual problems. I told the story yesterday about being at Michigan State, Chicago on one side, Detroit on the other side, and we were #1 in teacher education and #1 in this or that, and had no effect virtually on either one of those school districts that were in proximity. That's the bastion of the great research university, that the proximity to the problem is an issue. The third is that I make the case that even good intelligence needs a strategy. So even some of the poster sessions that I saw outside, we all live in an incredibly noisy, busy world. Even physicians now will report that the majority of their patients now show up with a lot more information about their ailment, right, than they used to, because they have access to information. So now they walk in telling the physician what they believe is wrong and what an appropriate treatment plan might be based on their research. But my point is that we live in a busy world. And I made the case earlier today. I work in the U.S. Department of Education of probably 4,000 employees. I might be the only person in the building with academic journals on my shelf. So what's the strategy? Even when we have good intelligence, what I am suggesting now is that how do you move that intelligence closer to the epicenter of real policy issues and real practical complications in the education space? Simply archiving it in an academic journal is not good enough. No member on the Senate Help Committee, I can tell you quite assuredly, is going to go to the archives searching for your article, which, by the way, may have been written a year and a half ago, right, and only showing up in the publication 16 months later, 18 months later. Now, am I suggesting that those are not important outlets for scholarly and intellectual work? No. But I'm suggesting that if we're going to think about it differently in terms of relevance and leveraging the educational research to actually move the needle on the issues we all care about, we have to rethink the strategy of positioning the work or placing it in front of people when they need it and in ways that they can consume it. And as a community of educational researchers, I'm not so sure that we do a very good job of that. The fourth, and next to last, is research as actionable intelligence. I read a number of studies, and when I put them down, I go, well, what am I supposed to do with this? I can't actually act. Maybe I'm smarter about an issue. And I'm talking about this in two different ways, not as individual researchers, but also as research communities, right? Nobody's studying civic engagement on their own. There are a community of folks who are studying civic engagement. Nobody's studying the effectiveness of charter schools on their own. There's a community of people who are studying charter schools. Nobody's studying the effectiveness of federal student aid alone. There's a community of people who are doing that. How do you leverage those communities to provide actionable intelligence? I told the story yesterday. When we look at large pieces of legislation, somebody asked me, well, James, who influences the policy debate in Washington, D.C.? It's not educational researchers. Hear me. Now, Dean Hess, I feel like I've got the license to, you see how silent the room is. I've completely lost the entire crowd. But I feel like I've got license to make these claims as a member of the educational research community. So don't take them overly as being overly critical. Take them as somebody who has seen the other side and paying attention to how our work is being consumed in public policy spaces. When you ask me who are the bigger voices on the Hill with respect to educational policy, it's not educational researchers. It's really smart people in think tanks who don't write for academic journals. And when we see policy proposals, they don't come from the research community. So then it makes me ask, well, we're conducting educational research to what end? Right? If it's not intended to improve policy or practice. The last thing I want to mention just before we close is that these are all issues that I think are important. What this translates to me is not that we have better policy, not that we necessarily have a better nexus between policy and educational research. Let me just be clear about this. I talk to college campuses and universities all the time about their policies and practices and how sure they are about the programs and services they provide for students. They all, when the guy from the U.S. Department of Education shows up, they all roll out the red carpet and let us show you this and how wonderful this is working. And the good news is that I've been to enough campuses to be able to quickly discern if there's something happening here or not. But when they're eager to tell me about how wonderful a program is, my second question is, how do you know it's working? And what I am suggesting is that we have an obligation as a community, not just in higher education, but K-12 as well, to make sure that the policies and practices we use to provide educational opportunities for students actually work as we believe they do. Every semester, a young new cohort shows up to colleges and universities with their hopes and dreams in their hand, a little bit of money and a lot of ambition, and they're trusting that we know what we're doing. And what I am sharing with you is that when I sort of look across the higher education landscape, we've got a ways to go in terms of leveraging or translating educational research to actually sort of inform the higher education policies, educational policies and practices in a way that really accelerate improving student outcomes, both at K-12, at the K-12 level and in higher education. Thank you very much. Thanks, Bob. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. And I also want to take an opportunity to thank Laura again for having invited James, indeed, and for Cliff for his inimitable introduction. Thank you, Cliff. And all of you for being here. James will be here. He is scheduled to an inch of his life, but his schedule is his, and I'm sure he'd be more than happy to speak with any of you if you'd like afterwards. And the posters are still outside until 2 o'clock, and thank you very much for coming.